I'm Lisa Stone. Thank you for joining us for this edition of Parenting Aces. Welcome to the Parenting Aces podcast. I'm your host, Lisa Stone, and I am so excited to bring you this week's guest, Ellen Miller. Not only is she a tennis coach, but she is also a tennis parent and a golf parent and a swim parent and a softball parent and a soccer parent. This lady's children, she has 4 of them, have played pretty much every sport under the sun. And Ellen herself is a master swimmer, but also a competitive tennis player and a phenomenal tennis coach who came up through multiple sports in her childhood, but gravitated toward tennis rather late in the game, wound up developing pretty quickly and played college tennis at Rice University and had a phenomenal college career. She's lived all over the world, literally, and is back in Houston now, where she is running her local NJTL chapter. She's coaching junior team tennis teams. She's coaching individual players, and she's also very involved with the USTA's Net Generation program. So without further ado, my conversation with Ellen Miller. Be sure and check out the show notes so that you have her contact info. Ellen Miller, thank you so much for joining us on the Parenting Aces podcast.
Hi, how are you? It's great to be here.
Well, I'm excited to talk to you because we got to each other when I posted something on Facebook looking for guests for the podcast, and you answered the call, and you have such a wide experience range in the sport of tennis, but also in other sports. And so I think, your story is one that is going to be really helpful to the Parenting Aces audience. So thank you for doing this. And let's start out by having you tell us how you got to tennis.
Wow. Well, I grew up in the years of, Chrissy Everett and, Tracy Austin playing when tennis took off in the late 70s, early 80s. And my dad loved tennis. He played all sorts of sports, loved tennis. I was actually a swimmer up until that point and took up tennis. I grew up in Buffalo, New York, so I learned how to hit on the wall, on my basement wall, and I do that for hours on end. So kind of taught myself how to play tennis and made the switch over. When I was about 13, I switched over to tennis permanently. And just, it took off. I still played other sports in high school, though, basketball, softball. I was an all-sport athlete. And, but then, took it a little bit further, got very focused and attended Rice University on a scholarship and played tennis there for 4 years. So, it's been a great journey.
That's fantastic. And now you're a coach.
Yes, I've been coaching off and on over 30 years, and I say off and on because we lived overseas for about 12 of those years in Germany and Switzerland, and I had 4 kids, so, I had to sort of juggle a lot of things at home, but got back into it bit by bit, mostly part-time when we lived in the Woodlands, Texas, and then got more into it full-time when we moved up to Washington, D.C., and now I work full-time for the Houston Tennis Association, NJTL, and direct a competitive program for them. And I'm also in charge of their coaching education.
What has been, in your opinion, the most significant change in the way we develop players in this country?
One of the things that I've seen, especially for the young children, getting more and more into tennis, as we say, is this focus on just tennis. And it's this race to get really, really good, really, really fast. And I don't think that people realize that tennis is a sport where, the average age of the players, men or women, are between the ages of, let's make it a random big number because I know what the average number is, but between 25 and 27. It's an older number. And I think, we're putting a lot of pressure on these kids to to develop so quickly, and, pulling them out of school to be homeschooled, and sending them to academies, to, pulling them away from their families. And I think it might be good for some kids, but it's an eye-opening experience for a lot of parents. And to be honest, it scares a lot of parents. Mm-hmm. So I would have to say that's probably the biggest thing. And it pulls these kids into the sport solely. In other words, they give up any other sports that they might be able to do. And I'm not totally sure that that's a good thing. I think we see repetitive use injuries. We see kids burn out. I think you also see kids come up through the sport who don't benefit from other sports. The movement abilities that they pick up from other sports, like say from basketball, or, the strength aspect coming out of maybe a track and field, sprinting, running activities. So I think it's a consideration that we need to look at very closely.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of research out there now about early specialization and its harmful effects. And, there's a lot of talk about we've got to develop the athlete first, the tennis player second. And you work with players who are coming into the sport for the first time, most of them, right? I mean, you're working
Correct.
with, yeah. And so how do you guide families around that?
We have a burgeoning, a blooming 10 and under program where I am. And I consider myself sort of a developmental coach, a 10 and under coach. And then of course I am high performance certified and played in college and all that. So I can coach all the way up with these kids. But I do think some of my expertise lies in coaching the young kids. And so I always encourage the parents to let the kids do other sports. I mean, we have a couple kids, like one of the little boys, he does soccer, so we don't see him as much as some of the other kids. And some of our other kids play volleyball, different sports. And I try to, hear my inner voice saying it's okay for them to do this. And sometimes it's hard because I know they're missing practice, but I do know, this little boy who plays soccer, for instance, has fabulous footwork on the court. So he's going off and doing another sport that makes him happy. And then those skills directly translate into his tennis. Mm-hmm. So I know we're still getting that benefit. He's just doing something else that day. And I think it's important to keep that in mind, that we want the kids to be happy, and young children don't necessarily know what sport they want to pick. And they need to keep going along their 2 tracks or 3 tracks, whatever they have. And then at some point they'll make their decision. And I think it's important to also remember that we can't force that decision. That's ultimately their decision, and probably falls a little bit with their family as well. But we want to keep them happy in the sport, particularly tennis for us, and hope eventually that they'll make the decision to stay with us.
How do you manage expectations, though? So let's say, for example, this little boy that's playing soccer too. I'm assuming that his peers in your tennis program who aren't playing another sport, they're maybe playing tournaments, they're winning trophies, they're coming back on Monday and, all happy about that. And your soccer player may not be doing that same level of competitive activity in tennis because he's also doing soccer. There's got to be some frustration on the parents' part, I would think, because maybe some of this little boy's peers are moving along quicker than he is. But how do you explain to them that, listen, by the time it's important, which is, let's face it, 15, 16 with college recruiting, that's when it really becomes important. Things will level out if your son decides to stick with tennis.
Right. And that is entirely possible. And, this little boy and a couple of the kids that we have doing 2 sports, it's interesting because they remind me a lot of myself growing up. I was just a real good athlete, playing sports. I played so many of them. And this little boy is a terrific athlete. And what's happened so far is he's been able to hang with the kids. He's able to stay on par with them. And then we've gotten the kids into JTT. And so the kids, we did a 10 and under orange ball team, and he was able to play with the kids on Sundays because the soccer games are on Saturday. So they're double teaming it, which is kind of interesting. And so right now he's able to do it. And some of our other kids are able to do it as well. So fortunately, he hasn't fallen behind. He's pretty much at the top of the pack still. But it is a consideration. And I think it's one of those things that you do have to look closely at is, is this child going to slip behind a little bit? But on the other hand, I still look at it as a double bonus that he's doing both these sports. They're both benefiting his tennis probably more than it's benefiting his soccer, but to do the two sports. But right now he's so young. He's 10 and he has so much time. I feel like the kids have so much time, and I tell them all the time, even our older kids, look, you need to go through your first years of high school. You don't need to worry so much about what your results are going to give you. We need to be more process oriented. So worry about, are we developing that slice backhand? Are we developing that key second serve? And I tell the kids, having dealt with college recruiting, if these kids want to go on to college, it doesn't really matter that much until you're in your junior year of high school. I mean, I've seen that play out for both of my kids who played NCAA sports. So I keep telling them, you've got a lot of time, just to be doing the right things to stay in the game and develop your game. And I think that will work out. And so far, I've been lucky with the kids I've worked with.
And how is the communication with the parents, though? Because a lot of times the kids get it, but the parents don't.
Yeah. I mean, the parents that are doing multiple things, they get it. I think they've heard enough in the media that, you need to focus really soon on your sport and this is what's out there, and college scholarships, you better be focused by the time you're, 7. And there's all this crazy stuff out there. But I think the parents, through a lot of dialogue, I've talked with the parents through this, and we're at a good place. I let them know that as long as they stay committed, to our sport, to what we're doing, and can continue to hang with the kids that he's playing with, which are orange ball kids right now. He's just getting ready to move up to green. We're okay with it. They know. And I think, a lot of the parents, when they're talked to and made to understand what the process is, I think they're okay with it. It calms them down a little bit. The dialogue with parents is so critical. And I think that so many of them, it's been interesting to me because I do early development camps. I'm on the player development side of the USTA as a faculty coach. And there I've gotten a great opportunity to work with parents. And we're doing a lot of parent education to tell the parents that, it's not a race to the yellow ball. We want the kids to go through red, orange, and green. And we want these kids to play the level ball that they're competent at, and we'll get to yellow. And I've learned a lot through the early development camps because we do evaluations for the parents, and we talk to the parents about all of this. And it's interesting, once the parents are on the page with you and they understand what's going on, they actually back off a little bit, and they defer to you. They realize that you have a game plan, that you understand what you're talking about, and they're like, okay, we'll go along with this. This sounds plausible. Just tell us what else we need to do. And I think that's incredibly important, is to keep that communication line open and actually to have started it in the first place.
Well, absolutely. And that's a common theme that runs through the Parenting Aces podcast, is the importance of good communication between coach and parent, between coach and player, player and parent, everybody involved. And one of the things that it sounds like you're doing really well is establishing a firm level of trust from day one. And I think when parents understand what the coach's plan is, like you said, you present a game plan to them, they buy into that, then they have trust in you to execute that, to keep them apprised of what's happening, to stay accountable for their child's progress. And it's easier as a parent to step back and entrust your child with a coach when that coach is communicating with you on a regular basis.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's funny too, because when I coached up at, I was up at the JTCC in Maryland for almost 5 years. And it's funny, I'm still in touch with all those families that I coached up there. And many of them I coached not just their first and second child, but, their third and fourth child. So, that relationship for me has been long standing, and some of these kids are, playing in national tournaments now. Some of the kids I've worked with over the years are going off to college. So it's really important to me to keep that relationship up. And even the parents that I don't work with now because I live in Texas, know that they can email me and shoot a message my way and ask for some advice. And it's critical because I think, it's for all of us, whatever we're doing, it's always nice to have sounding boards and to bounce things off of people. But again, to have that critical dialogue, because it is complicated. The world is going so fast and there's so many demands upon us and on our kids. And I think if we can have, that communication open and have that sounding block, it just makes life a whole lot easier.
Absolutely. One of your roles is that you're the director of coaching education and player development for Houston's NJTL. And I would love for you to talk a little bit about the NJTL and what it does and, what role it plays in your community.
Yeah. So the NJTL in Houston serves the greater part of Houston, which, if you can imagine, I think it's the third largest state, maybe the city, maybe it's the fourth. But anyway, we're talking a big city, big square radius. So we reach a lot of kids. We reach over 3,000 kids a year. And, our Kids Day is 1,000 kids. So we're reaching kids from all different backgrounds all over the city. And our programs take place in the Houston City Parks sites at their tennis courts. So we are all around Houston. And I believe we have something like 32 sites, if I'm not mistaken. So we have quite a few coaches. In the summer, we bump up to around 60 coaches. So we reach a lot of kids. And it's really exciting for me to reach those kids and to work with those kids, because we're talking about a subset of the tennis population that doesn't often get, to play tennis. And we want them to have the highest quality tennis program we possibly can. And that's another thing, it's hard when you have a group of kids at a Houston park and you have high numbers, because our programs are free for the kids. So, we work hard with the coaches to make sure that they can, that they know how to work with big groups of kids. We put the new next generation curriculum, the community curriculum, into play this summer, and we're continuing this fall, and it's been huge for us. It's preset lessons, and they're really fun games, really fun athletic skill development activities. So it's been wonderful. So we're building up our Houston Park site, and our goal out of that is to take these kids that come to these city park sites and then build what we would call a tournament players group out of that. So take the kids who really love the game, who want to take their game to the next level, and then I'm in charge of that tournament players group. And so we just started it last year, and we've had tremendous success. Some of the kids went out to play some of their first tournaments in JTT, and we did really well. The kids finished at the top of the JTT pile, for their age groups. And we've had a couple tournament wins and kids finishing, they belong in these tournaments. They're getting through to the third round, fourth round. Some of them are losing the first round, but they're winning in consolation. So we're in there. And that's what's so exciting for these kids, is that they're getting that chance that other kids get all the time.
Well, we all know how expensive junior tennis development can be. So, I think it's awesome that you guys are running these free programs. What kind of financial support do these kids get that are moving into your high performance tournament group?
They get support from many places. I know the USTA is very generous to our foundation. Chase Bank has also been very generous. And we're now the sole beneficiary of the U.S. Men's Clay Court Championships that are held just around the corner from us at River Oaks Country Club. And we are also the beneficiary of some other events around town, which really helps us. And then we do a big gala every year that also brings in funds. And then the Houston Tennis Association runs women's leagues, and much of the proceeds from those events and tournaments comes our way for the kids. So it's really it's this big group effort, if you will, that funnels money over to our NJTL. And I'll tell you something, it's been a godsend for us. The kids that I work with are just, first of all, some of them are phenomenal athletes. They love the game. They want to play. And so we scramble, to make sure that they have car rides just to get to practice. Some of the families have one car, that they have the ability to get to a tournament, So we, our families look out for each other. It's a different dynamic than you see at a club. And it's a lot more work, I'll tell you that much. But it is incredibly rewarding. That's for sure.
That's fantastic. I'm so thrilled to hear that y'all have the support financially that you need to help these kids really, grow and progress and thrive in the sport, because I think traditionally in many communities, NJTLs are set up, and the mission of the NJTL is so fantastic. But if the funding isn't there to support the kids that are coming into the programs, then, they really can't do their work. And I think it's fantastic that you'll have the support that you've just mentioned. I mean, the corporate sponsorship, the event sponsorship, the USTA sponsorship, the local community. I mean, it's just awesome to hear. I'm thrilled, because this is not a common story.
Yeah, no, it is. And it really is. As I said, it's this coming together of a lot of people who are passionate about tennis. And we had 2 courts over at our Sunnyside facility in Houston that were in need of repair. And last year, it was a conglomeration of professional men's players who put money together to help us resurface those courts. They all played at the Clay Court Championship this past April, and they put together money so that we could resurface the courts. And so the kids got to go out and hit with them. And it was just terrific. I mean, it was so generous of these guys to contribute back to us. And even, getting the courts obviously is going to allow many, many, many more kids to learn how to play, but also just the kids who were with these pros on the court. It was so exciting for them. So they kind of see what, and one of the pros, Francis Tiafo, took one of our little boys aside and said, hey, you could be a good player, if you work on a couple things, and that means so much to these kids. They look up to these guys with, wide eyes. And so every little bit helps. Every little bit helps us.
I totally remember when that happened last year, and it was all over social media. It was really awesome. And I mean, some of the players on the Pro Tour really have the biggest hearts and understand the importance of giving back. And I'm just always so excited when I get news of that, because I think it speaks volumes about our sport and the people who participate in our sport.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit, if you don't mind, Ellen. And I want to talk about now your role as a tennis parent, because you have 4 children, which, oh my God. And out of the 4, you have one who is currently playing college tennis, but all your kids have been involved in sport. So I'd love to hear about your experience as a parent, bringing up your kids in the sport, and then let's kind of talk about the recruiting process a bit.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, sports, I always say the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. I played so many sports growing up. I think in high school, I played 5 sports. But I loved so many sports. It was hard to pick. And my kids were, raised in that same vein. So they all did multiple sports growing up. All of them swam. And then they branched out into their respective sports. And my oldest son played collegiate golf at University of Maryland. And my daughter now is playing collegiate tennis at St. Francis University, just outside Pittsburgh. And so, having played sports as long as I had and then played in college, I knew, a little bit about what to expect. But, we learned a lot through my son, through the recruiting process. He was a very good golfer, probably he was top 75 when he was recruited. And so it was, we learned a lot there. And
like what?
When we got to the importance of knowing who you're going to play for. I mean, one of the things I always say to parents is when you decide you want to play a sport in college, you are no longer just a student. You are now a student athlete. And I've always told my kids, you need to understand that you have 2 jobs in school now. You need to go in there and make sure that you are academically eligible to play a sport. And that means you need to be responsible and not get sidelined by too much, college stuff, so that you stay eligible, you're ready to play, you show up, you're ready to play on the weekend or whatever you compete, and that you do both of these things really well. You have to keep your studies up to be eligible. You need to keep your sports up to keep your scholarship. And so there's two very distinct, although intertwined jobs that you have. And so we learned that through my son. And, he played with an individual on his team who became academically ineligible his junior year. And, this boy was a top 10 golfer in the country. I mean, we're talking a legitimate player. And, my son saw that, what happens when you don't keep both of these up. And so, my daughter coming into college, later than her brother, she knew that whole story. She had heard lots of stories about that. So you need to pay attention to that as a parent. And you also need to make sure that you understand, you know who the coach is. Is the coach going to be, fair and transparent so that your child gets to play based on their merit, based on what they bring to the table? And then you also have to look at the university and say, hey, is the university going to be able to support my child in the sport when they're there, if they need help? I mean, my son ran into it a little bit at Maryland. He got a lot of help. They were actually pretty good, but he was a chemical engineering major. I think he was the only engineering major in their golf team in the history of their team. And so, it made it difficult getting him tutors in, some of these really difficult classes. So those are things to keep in mind, I think, as a parent, because it's, and I think the other thing you have to keep in mind, and this is something I looked at very, very closely, was, is your child going to be able to compete on the team that they want to play on? And I think so many people make that mistake, that I want to go to this university, but is your child actually going to be able to play there? Or is your child going to be able to handle the academics and the play? So those are really important considerations that we looked at very closely.
Interesting. And what is different between recruiting for golf and recruiting for tennis? I mean, first of all, you had a son in golf and a daughter in tennis, so there are the gender issues that are different. But right. From a sports point of view, are there differences?
There probably are a little bit. I mean, golf is so finite in a way, because you're playing against a course. You know what I mean? You're playing against a golf course. And then when you get your results, it shows that, hey, you shot even par on, this particular golf course, and you won this particular tournament playing against these players. So sometimes I think it is a little bit easier. But I also think that coaches can go out and see the kids play for golf, and they watch an individual and they can sort of see their game, or they have a great short game, to back up a really long game, or what type of a player they are. But I do think it probably is a little bit more finite. It's kind of a fine line, but I would say golf is maybe a little bit more finite. You can see what the person is ranked at, and based on all these other kids, you can see what tournaments they won, who was in that field. So you can see that they've beaten some good players in a field at a tournament, even though they didn't directly compete head to head like a tennis player does. And so tennis is a little bit different too. And I think, I know tennis is also a sport that I see kids evolving a lot, and maybe not more so than golf, but a little differently, because it is competing against a player who's always an unknown. And I see tennis players' games evolving maybe even a little bit more over the years than maybe a golfer does. Obviously, a golfer's mental aspect gets tougher, and they develop more shots as they go along. But tennis is just different, because you play against somebody, and it makes it a little bit harder in that respect.
Right.
I don't know if that makes sense, but it's a tough question for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the sports are very different.
They are,
and the gender issue is there, and especially when it comes down to scholarships and what's available to boys versus what's available to girls. But so as your daughter was getting ready to go through recruiting, when you and I were talking offline, you were telling me that because she was a two-sport athlete, that added a challenge to the recruiting process. And I'd love for you to talk about that, because I think it's something that we don't discuss enough. And I would love for you to share how you and your daughter managed that when she was actually going through recruiting.
Yeah. I mean, her story is really fascinating because she started out as a little 4-year-old. You know, we used to sneak her onto the courts and let her play in the group. She wasn't supposed to be there because she was too young. But in any case, she started as a very young child and was a very, very good athlete. She did swimming as well. And then as she got older, she still played a lot of tennis. That was pretty much mostly her sport. But she got into softball and late. She got into softball like her 7th and 8th grade. And she played on a rec league. And then in high school, she went in to play on a travel team. And then she played on her high school team. So it was kind of late in her career that she got kind of focused on softball. But I think at some level, she had done tennis all of her life because I was on the court and she loved tagging along with me, and her older sister played. And so she kind of she was just there. She was just in it. And when softball came around, she really wanted to play, especially she got better. And she was a funny player too, because her swing looked an awful lot like a forehand, you know, but she was a real good hitter. She had that mentality that, hey, I can hit this ball. I've been hitting balls all my life, and wound up being the catcher on the team. But what was really fascinating is she decided that she was going to take some time away in high school from competitive tennis. And so I said, you know what, do it. You know, this is your choice. It's not mine. This has nothing to do with me. So she did it. And I heard a lot of flack from the coaches. Why are you letting her do this and whatnot? But she needed it. I think she needed it to see if she could do other sports and prove to herself. And it was kind of funny, as she played softball, she was the catcher, and it was a team sport too. So it was different. And she'd be roasting to death underneath her catching gear. And the girls out in the outfield, be, you know, letting balls drop or wouldn't be putting their best effort forth. And she got kind of tired of the team aspect of softball. And she wanted to go back to tennis. She said, I think I really want to go back to tennis. I'm okay losing. I can blame myself, whatever, but I think I want to do that. I think this is what I want to do. So she did that. Her coming into her junior year, she decided she was going to go back to tennis full time. So as you can imagine, in terms of college recruitment, you know, it's a little bit later than most people start thinking about it. So we had a little bit of work to do.
And so what did you do? I mean, how did she get on the radar?
You know, it was really interesting, and this was probably the best part of the story, was that it became her mission. It was her mission to get on the radar screen. And so I was coaching her a lot at that point, helping her. She has a one-handed backhand that I taught her. She's kind of a unique player, but, you know, we worked a lot on that and on her slice, getting her ready. We kind of fine-tuned her game. And then I set her off with an area pro, and I said to him, look, she just needs to hit with somebody. She needs a lot of sparring time. Just go out there and ace her. Go out there and hit your kick serve to her. Go out and slice a lot of balls to her. Make her understand how to play. And we did a lot of that her last year and a half. And she wound up getting back into tournaments, and her ranking just started to go up. Now, she didn't get out of high school with, you know, as a 4-star recruit. I think she only made it as a 3-star recruit. But what she was a really good athlete who really wanted to play. And she took it upon herself to email every coach she talked to in the recruiting process. I did absolutely nothing. In fact, I didn't even know who she was talking to. But what she did was really interesting. She went and looked at the kids she was as good at and looked at where they went to play and where they were playing in the lineup. She looked at kids she had beaten before and where they were playing. And she looked at kids that she lost to, but close losses, and saw where they were playing. And she put this little spreadsheet together and sort of did her own homework and reached out to some of these coaches. And sadly, some of them just slammed the door in her face and said, you know, you're not high enough ranked. You have this great resume, but we're not interested. Some didn't even write her back. And, the couple coaches took an interest in her. And we had made a video for her that she sent out. And she started talking to the coach, particularly at St. Francis, and he loved her athleticism and loved her, her determination to sort of steamroll ahead this late in the game. and they hit it off great, and that's where she wound up going, and she's a scholarship player there at that school. So it was a perfect fit. Like I said, it was a coach who recognized that this kid really wants to play. And I'll tell you something, that coach is so lucky to have her, because she's now the team captain, and her game has steadily taken off. And she does, she has seen some of her fellow players who have burned out in college and aren't really that interested in playing anymore. But like I said, she's still on that upward. She's a senior now, but she's still making improvements to her game and loves the sport and is a great leader for her team.
That's a great story, Ellen. I love it. I love it. And what's her major, and what is she thinking is going to happen when she's done, hopefully in the spring?
Yeah, not surprisingly, she's a funny kid. She's sort of created her own major. She started out as a criminal justice major, and as she's gone along, she changed her major. She's human rights and Spanish, and she has a minor in business. And last summer, she did an internship down in Bogota, Colombia at CODIS, and I couldn't even tell you how to pronounce the name of this company, but she did an internship, and they do human rights issues, particularly down in Colombia, and she got to work with them for several weeks and improved her Spanish, and saw firsthand that this is what she wants to do. And she'd like to ultimately work for a place like the UN, and work in any type of human rights issues that she can find. So so she's even been able to, believe it, it's a little bit of an unusual major, but she's already been able to do an internship and put this job to work. As you look at the world today, you can understand that human rights is front and center in a lot of what's going on in the world. So, it being a relatively new major at just a handful of universities, I mean, I think she's going to be gainfully employed. So, and she's very passionate about it.
That's fantastic. I love it. I love it. I love it. And she's continued to play tennis, and she's continued to play an integral role on her college team at the same time. So she has really embraced that whole notion, as you said, of you have two jobs. You're a student and you're an athlete. And it sounds like she's really maximized both of those. So kudos to her. I'm going to keep an eye on her and see where she winds up. She sounds like a really interesting young woman. So congratulations, Mom.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah. So let's get back to the coaching just a bit, and we'll start to wrap things up here. But as a coach who has parented her own tennis player and other athletes, what is the advice that you would give to parents whose children are just getting started in the sport?
I would say look at the long picture. It's a big, long road. I have a lot of children I work with that are 8, 7. It's a long road. I mean, it's a long road for them to even get to playing in college, and obviously this isn't even on the radar for them just yet. But even if it were, it's a long road just to get there. You're talking 10 years. And we want the kids to be happy in the sport. Sport is for a lifetime, especially sports like golf and tennis. You can play them for your life. And I think it's so important for the families to understand that you want to have a relationship with your kids forever. I've seen sports ruin family relationships. I played with teammates who had their family dynamic ruined by sports. It's not worth it. And I think what we need to tell our kids is that you're in it for the process. It's just like school. You're not going to learn everything in 5th grade that you need to learn by the time you get to college. You're going to learn something in 5th grade, 6th grade. And tennis is very much a process. You need to keep going along and keep making improvements to the game. It's okay to take a break. It's okay to do another sport. It's okay to have friends and go out with your friends one weekend and not do a tournament. As you get closer to that goal, if you want to play college tennis, yes, you need to increasingly do a little bit more, play more tournaments, maybe do a little bit more training as you get closer to that, to hone your skills. But I think we just have to remember it is a long process, and it's really hard to keep kids in the sport and not have them burn out. And I guarantee you any coach will say that's a fine line that they walk. And like I said, you just have to make sure that the kids have other interests. And I always told my own kids, look, you do so many things well. This is just one of those things that you do well. And some days you're not going to do it well. But just remember, you're a bigger person than just your golf game. You're a great son and daughter, a great sibling, a great friend to people, and you're a good student and all the other things that they do well. And we just need to remind kids that. And I think that the whole idea of staying process oriented and not so goal oriented early on is critical for these kids. Some of these kids get so much pressure locked on them so early. You got to win this tournament and you got to do well. I had a little boy. He actually wasn't that little. He was about 14, and his parents were getting on him because they weren't getting the tournament results that he wanted. I mean, you can imagine how this kid feels. And so there was all this pressure now from his parents that, all this money and you're not yielding the results. It's incredibly defeating for a child, and this kid had a lot of potential, but there needed to be some more dialogue with the parents and with this child that, look, we're going to stay on this process goal. We're going to add this and this to your game, and we're going to make these changes that we need to do. And maybe we pull you out of tournaments for the immediate future and make these changes and then go back at it. There just needs to be a good dialogue, keep that communication open and, just make sure that the dialogue between the parent and the kids is open,
Sure.
Know what your kids need. Where are they? Are they feeling burned out? Do they need a break? Do they do they want to try another sport? I think that's so critical because we're not going to get championship players out of kids who are putting half of an effort out there. It's just not going to happen. But if kids can find their own happy medium where they're able to do both and they're willing to take that challenge, sometimes that works better than just doing the one sport. You have to know your kid. You have to talk about it. And as I say repeatedly, the communication is the key on everybody's part.
Yeah. Yeah. I especially love what you said about it's okay to take a break. And that's a lesson that I learned too late with my child. And it's one that I try to talk about often now for parents coming up, because the burnout thing is real. It's the injury thing is real. And, talk about expensive. I mean, once your child is injured and you start looking at physical therapy and all of those things, I mean, cha-ching, cha-ching, cha-ching. And besides which, we want our kids to stay healthy. We want them to be able to move and to, enjoy life and have their body be in one piece. So, I think taking that break, the biggest lesson that I wish I had learned is that that's okay.
I agree. And my son was fortunate to do that, because he was playing golf, but we lived in the mid-Atlantic where you had snow in the winter, so they couldn't play golf very much. So he was actually, on his swim team in high school and, was the captain of the team. And he was a mighty good swimmer. But what was great about that is he got to be with different friends, and he was still working on his conditioning, and swimming is a tough sport from a conditioning standpoint. So he came out to that golf then in the spring and just, knocked it out of the park. He was fully conditioned. He had a break from the sport and he was ready to go. And that was so critical. But I also think that I used to know a coach up in the Woodlands, not far from Houston, who every year, his kids, he was a high school coach, they won the 5A cross-country title. And he used to say to his kids and the parents all the time, the rest is as important as the training. And you need to understand that. And particularly sports like cross-country where there's that constant pounding. But, let's face it, tennis isn't very far behind with that constant pounding on the court. And so I always remembered his words that the rest is as important as the training. And you have to give kids this. They're growing, their bodies are taking a pounding. And again, going back to that swimming and golf, two very different sports. You're using different muscles, but you're doing some conditioning. That great conditioning and, core body strength is definitely going to translate from a swimmer to a golfer. So those kinds of things are incredibly advantageous. And, I know it for myself because I'm a competitive swimmer still and compete on the master circuit. And I know how much swimming has helped my tennis. I mean, my footwork on the court is better than it was in college because my ankles are so much stronger. There's such a direct translation from so many sports. And again, that break, people forget that it's not just the physical break that your body's taking a pounding, but it's the mental break, just to shut down for a little bit, do something else, focus on something else, not have to, be juggling tennis and school and be able to, like my daughter talks about it. She goes, it's weird when we go to our off season and I don't have that much training right now. And she goes, it's interesting just to be a student, again, and just to be, so it is an adjustment, but it's also very positive.
Absolutely.
It's very important.
Absolutely. Well, Ellen Miller, you sound like an amazing coach and an amazing parent, and I'm so thrilled that we connected and that we've had the opportunity to chat. If the Parenting Aces community wants to reach out to you, where can they find you?
They can reach me at the NJTL. I'm happy to give you my email, which I know you already have. So actually feel free to use that, send information out. I'm always willing to help people. And as I said, we've been through it with our kids, especially like the college recruiting. And it's a daunting experience, all of this is, the whole process is. And, if you consider yourself lucky that you've gotten through it, we pat ourselves on the back and say, yeah, we did it, but I'm absolutely happy to help anybody out because it is something that, obviously you don't have experience with when you start out. So it is a daunting experience. So absolutely, send my email out, let people reach out to me. I'm happy to help any way I can.
Fantastic. So to my listeners, we will have Ellen's email address in the show notes. So be sure and check those out on parentingaces.com. And also, if you guys are interested in getting involved with NJTL, if you'd like to volunteer or make a donation, I'm sure Ellen would be happy to field your emails inquiring about that as well.
That'd be great. Yeah, we'd love any support we can have. And even so much of our organization, and I can probably speak for any NJTL in the country, that we have a lot of volunteers, and we love tennis volunteers. I mean, we host so many events and tournaments, and we have our Kids Day, and any volunteers who know the sport of tennis, oh my gosh, they're a godsend. So some of it doesn't even have to be, financial, anything like that. But like I said, warm bodies help us tremendously. And they're wonderful assets to our kids because they can tell the kids a little bit about their playing experience. So yes, please reach out to us. We would love any support.
Fantastic. Well, again, Ellen, thank you so much for doing the podcast this week. And to my listeners, thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time on Parenting Aces. I'm Lisa Stone, and you've been listening to the Parenting Aces podcast for tennis parents by a tennis parent. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe to us and write a review on iTunes. For more information on navigating the junior and college tennis journey, please visit us online at parentingaces.com. Thanks for tuning in and sharing us with your tennis community.